The other key aspect to understand about discovery is the power of slowing down. Discovery is the one area in our sales process that we really want to slow down and we want to take our time. Because if we rush through discovery, if we move too quickly from discovery to selling, the true discovery stops. Once we start pitching, once we start selling our solution, the customer starts buying. And so we have to be very deliberate in our thinking about how we're approaching the discovery that we're doing and make sure that we've gathered all the insights we can before we move to begin pitching or solving problems. The biggest opportunities often sit beyond that first conversation that we're going to have with our customers. And so we've got to stay curious as long as possible. And we've got to resist rushing to solve problems. The key thing, I think, is that we have to be productively selfish with our time, as Mike Weinberg talks about. And so we have to carve out time for ourselves to be able to do this discovery. And this discovery, again, happens in the planning portion, in development of our ambition and strategic account plan, and it happens in our preparation. We have to prepare really well before we go to these customer calls. And we have to make sure that the discovery is worth the time that we're investing in it. And we got to invest the time in it to make it worth the time that we're investing in it. Discovery shapes the positioning of our solution. It shapes the strategy that we're going to bring to the sales motion. It shapes the relationships that we need to have and helps us to identify the gaps in those relationships. It helps us to define the opportunity size, both initially, pre-conversation with the customer and post-conversation with the customer. And then it helps us to define the path of execution that we've got to go through, because that discovery effort helps us to define the customer's buying process. The key point here really is that slowing down in discovery often creates acceleration in our sales process later. Through discovery, we can also find ways to create competitive advantage for ourselves because we can position ourselves differently inside of the customer's operation and the value that we can bring that's unique to our product or solution that differentiates from any of the competitors that the competitors that they could consider. Another thing that I've learned over the years is that, some of the biggest opportunities didn't emerge from that first conversation. They emerged later on in the sales motion through that continuous discovery and through the bringing that ongoing curiosity to that sales motion. And oftentimes it's after the trust has been developed with a customer. And one of the key ways that we can develop that trust with the customer is through this level of discovery. Again, once they begin to see us as more than a vendor, as a strategic partner to their business, they begin to open up and that trust gets built and it gets strengthened over time. And they begin to really see that we understand and care about what's truly happening inside of their business. Discovery shapes the path. It reveals the path. It tells us what matters to the customer, who it matters to inside of the customer, the leverage points that they're dealing with inside and that we have to be able to understand and be able to leverage in our own sales motion as we go through. It helps us to define the path to value for the customer, and it helps us to define what must be true for the customer to realize that value and therefore for us to realize that value. In one of our future episodes, I'm going to go deeper into the discussion of execution and really the paradigm of GHOST. And GHOST is really important in execution in that we must define what our goals are, what our objectives are, our strategies are, and then the tactics to execute those strategies are. And we want to define those, but the GHOST paradigm also applies to us in discovery. Because if we can understand what the customer's goals are, and then we can begin to define what the objectives are that the customer is pursuing to achieve those goals, and then define the strategies that the customer is executing to achieve their objectives, we can begin to think about how we can align to the customer's strategies and to their objectives to help them achieve their goals. And that's where we have great opportunity to be able to differentiate ourselves from competitive solutions that might be out there in the marketplace and begin to shape our solution and our product to create that custom experience that I talked about in that sales motion that for the customer creates something very unique and special and gives us a competitive advantage in the way that we go about selling our product and solutions.